Disclaimer, there may be spoilers ahead for those who haven't seen the Gladiator movies. Hello, and welcome back to Unknown Military History. Today, we will be discussing the real history behind the Gladiator movies, which revolve around the turbulent decline of the Roman Empire. To discuss the history behind the recent second movie, though, we need to first look over the first movie before we do so. The first movie mostly centers around the reign of the Roman Emperor Commodus. Commodus was the son of Marcus Aurelius, who was commonly known to be as the last of the so-called five good emperors, and the reign of Marcus Aurelius was marked by relative peace in the interior of the empire, but constant warfare along its borders. In particular, Marcus Aurelius spent the majority of his reign fighting the Marcomannic Wars, which were a series of wars fought along the Danube against a coalition of Germanic tribes led by the Marcomanni. Now, it is important to note that during the early days of his reign, Marcus Aurelius also ruled alongside his younger adopted brother named Lucius Verus. While Marcus Aurelius campaigned on the Danube, Lucius Verus was appointed to administer the eastern provinces in Syria and the Levant. Verus's rule in the east mirrored that of his brothers, as he oversaw his defense against the Parthians in the east. However, during a brief visit to Rome, Lucius Verus contracted a disease that he had probably gotten from the east, most likely smallpox, and then died, leaving Marcus Aurelius as the sole ruler of the Roman Empire. Now, to tie back into the first Gladiator movie, it is mentioned in the film that Lucilla, the daughter of Marcus Aurelius, had married Lucius Verus and had a son with him of the same name, and she was also the sister of Marcus Aurelius' son and heir, Commodus. With that background in mind, we turn to the first movie, where we see Marcus Aurelius' conclusion of a last battle in the Marcomannic Wars. And in the movie, we see Marcus Aurelius naming his favored general Maximus as his heir due to Commodus' instability, leading to Commodus killing his father and becoming the emperor. This is not true when looking at real history, however, as Commodus had actually been named co-emperor by his father in the later part of his reign, even accompanying him during the Marcomannic Wars, which contrasts the film's depiction of him as suddenly arriving in the aftermath of the last battle at Vindobona. In real history, Marcus Aurelius actually named Commodus his successor, and after his death, Commodus became the emperor legitimately. And the film discusses Marcus Aurelius' desire to restore the Roman Republic, which is pretty far from the truth, considering the fact that he literally named Commodus as his heir. What the film does have more accuracy for is for the actual reign of Commodus. While the reign of Commodus was marked by a period of relative peace in Rome as he ordered the withdrawal of Roman forces from the hostile Germanic frontiers, there was much political instability and intrigue in Rome itself due to Commodus' slow descent into madness, and many historians consider the reign of Commodus to be the beginning of the decline of the Roman Empire. At the beginning of the film, we see Commodus discuss with Maximus to try to convince him to help him getting rid of the Senate and the politicians in Rome. And this part does hold some truths to history, as the ascendancy of Commodus to the throne also came with it a purge of supposed enemies in the Roman Senate by Commodus. Commodus also sponsored many gladiator games in order to boost his popularity with the Roman people, something which the first movie does touch on. However, not content with merely holding games, Commodus also participated in these games as well, fighting up dressed in animal skins, particularly lion skins, so that he could emulate Hercules, his favorite hero from mythology. And most of the fights that were involving Commodus were often staged, as no one could legally kill the emperor, but it made Commodus popular among the common people due to his entertainment. However, Commodus' megalomania only grew, and he often portrayed himself as a demigod, even wanting to rename Rome and its people after himself. And over time, his behavior became more tyrannical, as many were killed for plotting against him. This even included his sister Lucilla, who was executed after plotting to assassinate Commodus and put herself and her husband, who was a Roman nobleman, as the new rulers of Rome, which is a little different than the Gladiator movie. And in the aftermath of this event, Commodus further descends into madness, displaying more cruel and erratic behavior. And his rule undermined that of the Senate, whom he despised, and alienated the military and the Praetorians, who sided with the Senate. And this is where the movie Gladiator starts to differ a little bit from real history. The movie has Commodus dying, fighting a betrayed Maximus in the arena, but in real history, the conspiracy against Commodus was deeper than that. A plot was hatched against Commodus and sponsored by the Senate, led by a man named Quintus Latus, who was the prefect of the Praetorian Guard, as also seen in the movie as the man who refused to help Commodus when he fights with Maximus at the end, as well as the man who betrays Commodus and becomes his Praetorian prefect, also named Quintus. In any case, Quintus, alongside Commodus's mistress, a woman named Marcia, attempted to poison Commodus, but then the poison didn't work, so then Quintus bribed Commodus's wrestling mate, a man named Narcissus, to kill him. And Narcissus strangled Commodus in his bath, ending his reign. And now we will discuss the events that transitions Gladiator to Gladiator II. The sequel begins by stating that after the death of Commodus, Rome was ruled by two twin emperors, Caracalla and Geta. However, the film does leave out a crucial event, which is the Year of the Five Emperors, that occurred after Commodus' death and saw 5 men ascending to the imperial throne in a year through a series of power struggles and civil wars. And in the aftermath of this, a general named Septimius Severus emerged as the victor by means of a bloody civil war and killed his rivals, beginning the Severan dynasty. Severus' rule is marked by constant warfare against both barbarian tribes and the Parthians in the east. And despite his unpopularity with the Senate, he had the support of both the military and the common people of Rome, and his reign was relatively successful as it allowed Rome to recover from the turbulent years of Commodus and the civil wars that followed. During his reign, Severus had 2 sons by his wife Julia Domna, named Caracalla and Geta, who accompanied him when he campaigned his last battles against the Scots. When Severus died of old age, he left the empire to be jointly ruled by his 2 sons, Caracalla and Geta, which is where the setting of Gladiator II occurs. And the film itself revolves around the life of Lucilla's son Lucius Verus, who, unlike in real history, is still alive in this movie and living in Numidia. Historically, the Numidians were conquered by Rome centuries before this during the era of the Republic, and Lucius Verus is portrayed by the name of Hanno, which is actually a Carthaginian name, and the Carthaginians had already been wiped out during the Punic Wars, which also occurred during the Roman Republic. And in the second Gladiator movie, we also see a Roman general named Marcus Acacius lead a campaign into Numidia under the direction of the twin emperors Caracalla and Geta in order to conquer it. And Marcus Acacius was not a real historical figure, but the Roman invasion of Africa does have a little bit level of truth, because during the reign of Septimius Severus, he did lead a campaign in the province of Africa in order to enlarge the Roman province of Numidia against the Berber tribes to the south. And Lucius Verus' character in this movie, as well as his mother's, is pretty much fictional since both of them were already dead by this time period. Verus was dead due to disease at a young age, and Lucilla had already been executed by Commodus decades earlier. So we'll instead focus more on the reigns of the twin emperors Caracalla and Geta, as well as the rise and fall of the upstart Macrinus. When Caracalla and Geta became co-emperors after the death of their father Septimius Severus, their reign immediately got off to a rocky start due to their rivalry towards each other. Even when they were going back to Rome from the British Isles to bury their father, they still argued. And unlike the movie, which depicts Geta as the more dominant and mature older brother, real history has Caracalla being the elder brother, who had more experience since he had accompanied his father on the campaigns in Parthia early on. And in any case, their joint rule was still a failure, as Geta resented Caracalla for having the first position in the empire due to him being the elder brother. And this is unlike the film Gladiator II, which portrays Caracalla's jealousy towards Geta, who was the elder brother in the film, as being the reason for murdering him. What the movie does get right, though, is the death of Geta, though real history tells it in a bit of a different story. What happened was their mother, Julia Domna, attempted to bring about reconciliation between the two brothers by arranging a meeting between all of them. However, at the meeting, Praetorian guards suddenly rushed Geta, stabbing him to death in his mother's arms. Caracalla most likely ordered the assassination of his brother, as in the aftermath of this event, Caracalla persecuted Geta's supporters and friends, executing all of them and proclaiming to the Senate to damn his brother's memory from history by getting rid of all records or people who had ties to his brother. In the aftermath of this, supposedly 20,000 people were massacred under the orders of Caracalla. And despite Gladiator II's portrayal of Caracalla as more of an unintelligent sadist, in real history he was more of a cruel but not inefficient leader. Because during Caracalla's early reign as the sole empress, he did do a number of things. For one, he passed a new constitution which declared that all free men of the Roman Empire would be given full Roman citizenship in order to increase revenue for Rome's economy, which had been weakened due to the past civil wars as well as the treasury being drained by Commodus during his reign. As emperor, Caracalla also saw the completion of the famous bath project, which had been started by his father, that are now known today as the Baths of Caracalla, which at the time were the largest baths in Rome before Diocletian's baths were constructed several decades later. Being bored of administration, however, Caracalla left his mother in charge of Rome's administrative duties and set out to tour the provinces, never to return. And this is a stark contrast with the movie Gladiator II, as the movie portrays Caracalla as someone who's never really been outside of Rome in its vicinity, when he in fact would spend pretty much the rest of his reign outside of Rome. Caracalla first went north on the border with the Germanic tribes, where he fought a successful campaign against the Alemanni. In the aftermath of this, he decided to go toward the eastern provinces and ended up in Alexandria, Egypt. However, the citizens of Alexandria created a sort of satire play that mocked Caracalla's murder of his brother Geta, resulting in an angered Caracalla ordering the sack of the city and plundering it, even though it was literally a Roman city. After this event, he then went to Antioch in order to prepare a campaign against the Parthian Empire in the east. Caracalla wished to emulate Alexander the Great and invaded Parthia, even organizing parts of his military in the style of Macedonian phalanxes. However, Caracalla would not make it out of this campaign alive, as he was assassinated by his own men under a Praetorian prefect named Macrinus. Now, the origin of Macrinus, as played by Denzel Washington in the film, is obscure, but most agree that he was born in what is now modern-day Algeria to a family of Berber Mauritanians, and we do not know how, but in his early life, Macrinus had somehow come under the surface of Caracalla's father, Septimius Severus, where he rose through the ranks to become a bureaucrat. Unlike the movie, we have no evidence that Macrinus was a former slave or a former gladiator, or that he owned a bunch of gladiators. What we do know is that Macrinus was appointed the commander of the Praetorian Guard under Caracalla, an event which does happen in the movie. Macrinus' murder of Caracalla, however, may not have been through a series of political maneuvering as portrayed in the film, but out of fear. Macrinus, according to tradition, had heard that Caracalla knew of a prophecy in which he would depose and succeed the emperor. Fearing for his life, Macrinus and his Praetorians killed Caracalla while he was pissing while they were campaigning against the Parthians, and Macrinus declared himself the emperor with support of his troops. The army had backed Macrinus to become emperor, and so did the Senate, despite the fact that they were not even in Rome at the time. And Macrinus would become the first emperor to hail from Mauritanian descent, as well as the first emperor who came from a lower class background. However, the reign of Macrinus itself was very short-lived. Unlike the movie, where Macrinus was killed in a duel fighting Lucius Verus, in real life, it was a little bit more complicated than that. He first faced defeat against the Parthians they were fighting at the Battle of Nisibis, and that forced Macrinus to pay a large indemnity to the Parthians. And after concluding that indecisive war, Macrinus wanted to overturn Caracalla's financial policies towards that of the late Septimius Severus in order to balance the economy, but in doing so, Macrinus ended up lowering the pay of many recruits in the military who had enjoyed much higher salaries under the reign of Caracalla. Thus, the very legions that had supported Macrinus were now against him, which was a fact that was further heightened by Macrinus' decision to remain in the east instead of going to Rome upon being declared the emperor. Macrinus, unlike in the movie, would never actually enter Rome in his lifetime. And around this time, the mother of the late Geta and Caracalla also died, and she had a daughter named Julia Maesa. And Julia Maesa plotted to overthrow Macrinus and restore the Severan dynasty by rallying support of her grandson, a boy nicknamed Elagabalus, proclaiming him to be the legitimate heir to Caracalla. And Elagabalus was popular with a number of legions as he practiced as a priest of the sun god, and soldiers flocked to his banner despite the fact that he was only 14 at the time. And in the ensuing Battle of Antioch, Elagabalus, alongside his generals, defeated Macrinus, who was killed trying to flee, and thus Elagabalus assumed the throne, which is how the real story went. And there are a couple of other things that Gladiator II does not do totally accurately, as Caracalla is portrayed as having a pet monkey and naming his senator a monkey earlier in the film, or later in the film more like, but in real history that never really happened. But there was an emperor named Caligula who, a couple generations ago, some say that he named his horse an emperor, whether as a joke to displease the Senate or not, as well as the Gladiator II movie itself does portray water battles in the arena, which were a historical event that did happen, but there were no sharks in those battles. But in any case, it does make for an epic scene, and I would recommend the movie, of course. But in any case, I hope you have enjoyed this episode discussing sort of the real history of what Ridley Scott's Gladiator II movies were based on.